Yeah, and okay, that's good. Anyway, I just want to say thank you for joining me today. Just a little bit of your time.
Pumped to be here, man. Thank you.
Yeah, so I summer's around the corner, and I thought it would be a great idea to kind of talk about how people can start, let's say beginners, or people can start seeing results with the time span that we have. Today's April. We're in April, and we have until June. Is it possible to see some notable results during that time, or even then just to get started? Um, so the beginning of next year could they probably have already caught up.
Yeah, absolutely. And
With
I mean, you're right. I think that this is actually the best time for people to start taking those steps towards, improving their body composition or just getting healthier because they, most people, at least the kind of people that are not into fitness, they've always want to, I mean, it depends on the goal, right? But most people really just want to get healthier, look better, and also improve their self-esteem. And so, the fact that we have summer around the corner is like an extra uh, benefit to it. It's like, yeah, I want to look great for summer, right? And I think that the biggest thing is just taking action. There's something that I always tell to my clients, and this is something that I hear a lot from clients that come to work with me, is that there's just so much information that it's really hard to know what to take in and what to apply. And I really like to call that, overload. Information overload leads to implementation underload. So the biggest thing I think, what do you relate to that?
I relate to that a lot. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can
so
definitely that's a great way to put it.
yeah, so I think that that's the biggest thing. It's really hard for people that are not at least that are not in the fitness atmosphere to know what to do and actually start to do something. And I think the biggest thing, if you're listening to this recording, to this podcast, and you're just like starting from square zero, really just focus on the basics. Like, don't try anything drastic. Try to just eat healthier, more whole foods, right? Try to walk more. Like, if you're starting from ground zero, like just try to eat healthier again. Better food choices, improve your sleep. Um, and yeah, I mean, just start from the basics and then improve from there. I don't know if the things, I don't want to go get super in depth into like recommendations, because again, like, I'm not sure exactly who we're talking to. Is this like a complete beginner or someone like a little experienced?
Right. So what I want to do is I've written like a set of steps we should kind of break down into, like starting from like the goal, which is like where we could start the foundation from, and then from there we could get into like the nuance. But before we get into all these different steps, and then at the end there's a Q&A, if that's okay, and there are people that ask questions that they want would like to ask you with whatever time we have left. Um, I want people to kind of get an understanding of who you are and what brought you into the industry, or what specifically bodybuilding, because I know you competed. I'm not sure if you still compete.
Yeah.
Um, like what got you here and your experience and the knowledge that led you to become a really successful fitness coach.
Well, of course. So I think that the biggest thing is, I mean, starting back from when I first got into fitness, is the fact that I grew up doing sports. So my entire life, I pretty much, before I learned to walk, my dad was a very successful swimmer, and therefore he wanted me to follow his footsteps. So I started swimming at a very young age. Again, I learned to swim before learning to walk. So I did that since I was like around 14, 15 at a very high level. So I would go to practice every single day, at least from Monday to Saturday, and swim something like 3 hours a day. So that was like super high intense swimmer for a long time. The thing though is that even though I was putting in a lot of work, I was swimming a lot, my fitness was in a really good place. I was always overweight. I spent my entire childhood as a overweight kid, and it can be really hard for someone, more so in swimming. Like I don't know if you're aware of how like swimmers like their physique, but most swimmers are in a really good shape. So I was always like, the black sheep, if that's a good way to put it. Always kind of chubby because you cannot outwork about that, right? So at around 15, 16, I started to get into the gym pretty much to kind of compensate a little bit my swimming because I wanted to get better and therefore I needed to grow some muscle. But slowly I started to fall in love into the process. Like I started to see results. I started to see myself, okay, I'm getting bigger, I'm losing weight, I'm feeling great. And I started to transition into a little bit more into a bodybuilding style of training. And subsequently I just went full into, just nutrition, training for bodybuilding and stopped swimming. Um, that was around, I did that shift at around 16, 17. And around that time, I actually moved to the States. So I was, you might have heard from, you might know from my accent. And I think that we spoke about this before on message. I am actually Venezuelan, so I lived there my entire life since I was 16, and then almost when I was 17, I moved to the States in around, I think that was 2016, late 2016. And when I moved here, it was like, starting from ground zero, I had to pretty much relearn everything, language, how people behave, And I think that that was also a good thing because that led me to, okay, kind of think what I want to do with my life now. And I thought, I love fitness, and that's pretty much how I started. I got my coaching certification, and then I started to work with clients. That's how I started.
That's awesome. And look at you now. You have great connections, I think, with Dr. Mike and all those people too.
Yeah, man. I
Yeah,
mean,
I could sometimes I consider you part of Team Full ROM just because when someone says full range of motion, like one of the first people that pop up in my head is you because I see your stories. You're always doing like these extreme range of motion things, and I'm like, not a lot of people do that, even though I love it myself. I try to get the more
yeah, I
full
mean,
range of motion, and we'll get to that in an exercise. So we'll get to that more specifics. Nothing like too depth like the studies. I kind of want people to still get like an applicable sense out of these things. Um, but we would get into training programs and kind of like that in a bit. Um, First things first, I would maybe start with goal setting. I think that's where everything starts from, right? Uh, or I don't know if there's a step before that that you'd like to think of. But how would you, or even if you had a client, how would you kind of go at them when they say they want to get started, or we're in this, like starting from here, maybe a little months before, I want to get good for the summer, but I also want to kind of keep this consistent, balanced lifestyle, being healthy, um, with whatever age you can think of it, whether it's younger or maybe we're getting a little more to the older side with like joint pain and stuff like that. How would you kind of go at that? And kind of giving them a tip on how to start their goals with whatever it is.
sure. So I think it all comes down to first setting realistic expectations. So, okay, figuring out what's possible based on the commitment that's required. Um, sorry, I don't know. Can you hear that? There's like a little noise. I don't know if you hear it on your end.
I
Yeah,
hear
there's
it. I hear it in your background. Is that me
no,
or is that
there's.
you?
I think it's. I mean, it's not me. It's not on my end. I'm not sure what that might be.
Um, I'm not entirely sure what that is. It started picking up in a bit. Give me stay there. Yeah, not me. Um, it's weird. This had happened before.
Just want to make sure is that on
Do you
your
have a
end?
mic? I
No,
mean, I don't have a mic with me, so I don't. Why is it picking up?
okay.
Did it work?
Yes, no,
You hear it?
it's what. Yeah,
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I don't know why I was picking up.
that's
It
weird. It
started
was like
picking up.
something
Anyway,
building up.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I mean, one of the things that I like, that I tend to start posting on my YouTube, I have like a kind of like, I don't want to say I have OCD. I just want to say like I have like a certain thing of everything being perfect. So it's like
Yes.
I try to make sure everything's as it is, which would led me to kind of stall on posting YouTube videos and podcasts. But then I kind of like learn to release a little bit, and it's like I'm gonna do what I can, make it more look more like me. I feel like there's a better connection to the people who watch it. Because when you go on YouTube, it's just like everything is like perfect. Everyone has like a perfect script. It's not like that. Like it's a lot
Yes.
more work. But anyway, before we go off on a tangent, again with the goal setting, how would you recommend that, and how would you get somebody getting started with whoever they are?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it's a matter of asking the right questions and really making sure that we're setting the right expectations based on the commitment that's required. So, if someone wants to get like really lean and they're at around, let's say, 15% body fat, 18% body fat, but at the same time, they're not willing to, sacrifice a little bit of their weekends and they're not willing to track everything to the T, then, it's something that we have to talk at the beginning and say, hey, so it's one or the other. So it's like we can get you really lean, um, but that's going to require certain, commitment and sacrifice. But I think it's a matter of discussing that. So, I mean, how do I set that up? Uh,
I know it can
okay,
be a bit hard just because there's so many different people.
yes,
So if it's easier for you, you could try to add context to it, but just for people to get an idea and maybe where they could start.
yeah. So, I mean, let's say that we're
For
talking about that.
example, let's
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
Go
Oh no,
ahead.
I mean, if you ever had it, I was gonna give you an example. I was like, well, let's say you have a new client coming in. I already told you, like, let's say he wanted to get ready for the summer, but he has trouble sticking to his goals, and maybe he doesn't know. For
Yeah.
example, like me, if I don't write an agenda, I'm all over the place, and it
Hmm.
happens very easily.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's a matter of, again, just setting their expectations and not just focusing on the long-term goal, but also really focusing on the small steps along the way. I think that most people just get caught up on the big things that they want to accomplish, like, okay, I want to lose 20, 30 pounds and get really lean for summer. But the thing is, really focusing on the outcome is not going to get you to get the results that you want. It's actually the daily intentions and really acknowledge the wins and the progress along the way. So, if we have 20, 30 pounds that we want to lose, even though that's the goal, maybe that's not going to be feasible for summer right now, but focusing on a weight loss rate of half a pound to pound per week is really sustainable. And that's something that we can get done for sure, with a certain level of commitment. And it's not going to be super hard. And the cool thing though is that as we um, track that data and we acknowledge those wins on a week to week basis, that builds momentum, builds and builds its own fire. I tell my clients that it's really hard at the beginning, but as you start to see those wins and you start to measure that progress, that pretty much becomes like you become your own motivation because you see that progress that you've made, you see yourself in the mirror and you're like, wow, I made really good progress. I want to keep this going, right? So it's a matter of measuring and really focusing on the small wins. So that's when it comes to like progress. Let's say for fat loss, um, making sure that you're losing about half pound to pound per week for sure. And since you want to improve your body composition as well, really make sure that you're following a good, decent training plan that allows you to get enough training volume for each muscle group, and make sure that you're tracking your stuff so you make sure you're applying progressive overload. And therefore, if you're a beginner, you are most likely going to be able to put on some muscle as you lose fat. So that's the basic idea on what I would do for like a regular person who just want to get in a really good shape for summer.
Right. And one thing that a lot of people tend to kind of rely on is their motivation. But, sometimes I think motivation is like a feeling. What's like someday you're feeling motivated, the other day you just don't. And I feel like they always, maybe if you could elaborate more on the feeling of like they always try to rely on motivation. Doesn't always isn't always the best route. I don't know if you talk to people about that or maybe having something else than rely on motivation. Is there something else that you think is more important than just motivation?
Yeah, so I think that motivation can be really awesome, a really good tool to use. But I think that most people get the formula wrong. Because I think that most people think that they need motivation to get to work and then get the results. When in reality, it's more like you have to be willing to put in the work, even if you don't see the results just yet, even if you're not, if you don't know for sure that it's going to work, but you have to be willing to put in the work regardless. So that requires to have a good plan. So you have a good plan, you put in the work that leads to results, and then you get motivation. And that's pretty much what works for me and works for all of my clients is that you first have to be willing to put in the work, but as you see results, again, you're going to build that fire as you see the progress that you're making, right? So I think it's useful, but as long as you have your priorities right.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it about the formula being maybe flipped around because everybody thinks motivation comes first and then everything else comes after. From what I see.
Because in the end, it's
So
like you're yeah, sorry, yeah, I want to say that you're going to have days that are not going to be perfect. Life happens, work, family stuff, and maybe you're just really tired after work. It's like the last thing you want to do is to go to gym. You gotta know that like it's really easy to make the right decision once you have that progress behind you, right? So it's a matter of keep putting in the reps and um, really focus on those higher goals, right?
right. Well, I'd like to get into the training on how somebody can start maybe having an idea on how to build a training program, or where they can start building a training program.
Sure.
And one of the things that people think to find is that what is the best split? Right? It's like, is it full body? Is it half body? Is it bro split? Um, what do you think would probably fit, or do you think there's something else that any split can work, and it just comes down to the person's or the individual's um, maybe lifestyle, I could say, or do you have like a specific split that you recommend for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really depends on the person, like depends on lifestyles uh and goals overall. Like, I would not have John, who's a dad that works 40 plus hours per day, per week, sorry, per week, doing my training split, right? Because it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit his goals because his goals are not my goals, and we have completely different lifestyles, right? But I think that any training split that allows you to get in enough training volume for each muscle group and that allows you to train at least 2 times per week, it's a smart move. So I think that for most people, a training split that allows them to train something like 4 to 5 days per week. So something like an upper, lower, or upper, lower, push, pull legs. It's a decent split. And yeah, if you can get at least 10 to 20, as long as you can, you're able to fit in around 10 plus sets at least at the beginning of working sets per muscle group per week. I think that it's a good place to start.
Right. Yeah, because I see a lot of people saying like bro splits are coming into like becoming more popular, and everyone's like, oh well, bro split's the best way because then you can hit every single muscle group in a better way. And I'm like, well, yeah, but there's more context to that. And rather than saying that it's the best split, it just comes down to the individual, as you were saying. Um, and I want to get into the volume and intensity recommendations. I want to narrow down the context into more specificness so we can get more direct answers, than just saying there's always nuance everywhere. Because that's the reality. I don't like to give direct recommendations for people who comment on my Instagram or TikTok, because then they're always like, "Oh, I weigh this much, I do this. What do you think is the best exercise?" I'm like, "Well, I can't really give you an answer on that," and I see that all the
Exactly.
time. So starting off with volume and intensity recommendations, how do you think a person starting would try to, how many times would you recommend starting as a muscle group on average for the average beginner?
So when it comes to volume, and this is a topic that a lot of people might. I mean, I found every time I kind of talk about it on social media, there's always a guy or a girl like commenting like, "Oh, you're not what you don't know what you're talking about because blah blah blah." And I'm like, look, beginners do not need more than, in my opinion, 15 sets per muscle group per week. That's just it. If you're just starting out, you will get crazy gains by doing something like 10 to 15 working sets per muscle group per week. Again, it depends on the muscle group and it depends on the person. But again, since you're just starting out, you really don't I don't see any necessity of going above that, at least at the beginning. And that's when it comes to volume. If if possible, if we can split that out in 2 sessions, that'd be best because the thing is, there's just so much work that you can do in one session before it starts to be detrimental, right? Like if you can do more than 10 sets, 10 hard sets, 10 to 12 hard sets in a workout, man, that'd be really surprising. At least for me, I can't go above 12 sets if before it starts to become detrimental, right? So that's when it comes to volume.
And speaking of that, I know if we're gonna go about intensity, a lot of people don't really train hard enough. I think they think they beginners would go like 4 sets of 10 reps. They do an insane amount of volume. That I mean, at least I would consider insane for me. 4 sets of 10 reps for say for every exercise, and maybe you see progress with them because they make up for the intense. They make up with the lack of intensity for, I guess, the volume recommendation that they're doing, and that works to an extent. I don't want to say just because you have no intensity and you have high volume, it's going to work. But do you notice that when people train to intensity, do you think that they're training where they need to be, or do you think that they lack the I guess experience of knowing what training to failure is really like for them to kind of build a foundation of how close they need to get to that point?
Yeah, so I really think that beginners at the beginning, when you're starting out, you don't need to work really hard to make gains. If anything, um, I don't know. Can you hear me well? I just want to make sure that. Can you hear me? Can you hear me
I
well?
can hear
Oh, cool. Yeah,
you.
just making sure because the noise was coming up, so I was like, I'm not sure if you're hearing me. Um,
Yeah, it
so
was weird.
yeah, so now it's good. So I think that first things first. I see a lot of beginners that they start and or a lot of people say, well, you have to train really hard in the gym to get gains, right? And yes, there's some truth to that. You have to work close to failure to build muscle. Now, the the thing though is that most beginners don't need that. Most beginners, I think that would get the most gains if they just, at least in my experience with clients, is that if we really focus at the beginning on making sure that every rep looks okay, that we're not doing like very bad technique and we're using the muscle that we're attempting to work on the given exercise, that's a great progress from doing nothing, right? So if we get to do that at first, most beginners will make crazy gains by just that, let alone. Now, as we progress, because again, we're tracking data, week by week, we want to add one more rep, 5 pounds, and just keep progressing that way. That's pretty much how I get a client to from ground zero to by the end of the first month to realize what true, at least, um, failure. And I don't want to say failure because I usually don't take clients to go all the way to failure, but what what technical failure is, right? So I think that's a good way to put it. And I think that if you grab someone who has never touched a weight to do the technique right, and then progressive overload from there, they're gonna make great gains, regardless. So I don't see any necessity to have someone going all the way to failure from the get go.
Right. So you tend to rely more on like their form failure per se. Is that
Yeah, yeah, and more so at the
So
beginning, more so for beginners. As we become more advanced, for sure, like okay, you have to really ask yourself, am I pushing hard enough? And there are times in which we test that, like on the last week of a training block, we can really push those sets and find out, okay, is this true, like at least technical failure? Yes, no. Then if not, like I usually add one more week on top. And that's more so for intermediate to advanced type of lifters. But for beginners, I don't see any necessity to do that because they're gonna make gains regardless, as long as they're doing the technique right.
right. Um, and speaking about that, do you know if you tend to separate the training from a female and a male, or for a woman and a man? Do you think that there's a difference in training and intensity and volume, or do you kind of keep them very equal? Or there's a lot of similarities, but some differences?
Yeah, so they're very similar in the sense that just a couple of things change. So the first thing is goals. You know, women tend to want to grow more some muscles than others. So I tend to bias a little more volume towards, the lower body, glutes, hamstrings, quads, and of course we still get enough volume for the upper body, but emphasizing a little more the lower body. And overall, though, and the other thing is that I tend to start women at a slightly higher volume because at least in my experience and for the research that I've been able to get my hands on, they tend to they tend to recover a little bit better and faster from a higher training volumes. So that's the only difference. Overall, everything is pretty much equal. We have to apply progressive overload. We want to emphasize good technique, and yeah, like the programming and how we progress is pretty much the same, but just goals and volume landmarks. That's the only thing that changes.
Okay. Yeah, because some people take the sense that women can handle much more volume, and and then they see that if there's for example, they try doing sometimes a woman's program per se, they think they can't handle it because there's too much volume. Do you think a man could get away with doing kind of like a woman's design program? Because there are some apps that have like these programs are kind of mixed for both of them, like having two in one. They're like, oh, this works for a woman and a man, but then you realize like the volume tends to be a little higher. Do you think guys can get away with doing a little bit of the woman's side of volume, or do you think that'll be too much of a um, too much taxing on their body or not?
I mean, I think it can work for sure. It's going to be like super optimal. I don't know. I don't think so. And also, when it comes at least to the way in which I program, for example, like volume tends to be slightly higher on the women's side, but it's not by a huge margin. It's usually by a couple of sets per session. Because here's the thing, I've had women, and again, this is I'm not trying to say that women don't know how to train hard enough or anything like that. But in my experience, men tend to be more towards the side of sometimes pushing it too hard, and women sometimes tend to bias more towards the side of not pushing hard enough. So when you have an individual, whether it's woman or man, pushing hard enough on a given set, on a given workout, I think that, differences are really low. So I think that just women can handle a little more volume, but it's not by a huge margin. So can a man get gains by following like a women's uh, program or using the volume of a woman? Yeah, I think so. Um, but I don't think it's the best way to go in that regard. Like, we have things that work and then we have optimally. So it's just a matter of what you choose.
Okay. Um, then, well, now that we have like more of a understanding of the training thing, I want to go more into the nutrition side of things,
Okay.
um, and the similarities and differences there. Starting off with carbs, there's a lot of controversy with carbohydrates, saying that they make you fat, and then therefore they cut off carbs, and because they cut off carbs, that's the reason they're losing weight. Um, Do you think that's
Sorry,
entirely
I
true? Do
can't.
you think
For some reason, I can't hear you right now. I just hear the beep.
still?
Yeah, it
Uh,
just goes
try
on.
to. Can you mute your mic? Is it muted? You still here?
No, I just
You
muted
still
and
here?
then no, now it's it works. Can you hear me well?
So weird that. And yeah, no, it was going. It was getting louder and louder. That didn't happen in the last podcast. And it's entirely new.
You think it
If
could be
anything, when
mine?
that happens, just try. I know what Milo did on the last podcast is that whenever I would talk, he would mute his thing and then he would unmute it when he would stop.
Okay.
I'm not sure if maybe he knew that. I don't know if that's happened to him before,
No,
but that's
never.
something that I noticed. I didn't quite.
Never, but now
Maybe
that you
try
said
doing
it,
that.
like now that you said it, as soon as I did mute it, it went off. So maybe it's my Mac. So if
No
that
problem.
happens again,
I was hearing you fine.
sorry what?
I was hearing you fine. I was hearing you fine. Just the noise was getting a little louder, but
Yep.
you're good. Just try doing that if that happens again. Anyway,
Cool.
nutrition wise, I think this is the most crucial thing. Well, one of the most crucial things, and I think it's something that people tend to they think they can out train a bad diet, and by doing so, they think if they work out hard enough, they can therefore eat whatever they want because they see. I, I guess they see people like me. They train really hard, but and then here I am going out and then eating at Burger King one day and then doing this the other day, and it's like yes, I do enjoy food. I love it, but that's not to say that just because I post maybe a dessert because I went out with some friends one day. All I eat is dessert. Like there's more to
Yeah.
that behind the scene of having a good diet. So maybe if you want to elaborate on that and how do you go by diets or do you have like a balanced way of eating that worked for you?
Sure. So, and it's funny because now that you said it, that's the thing with social media. Um, Honestly, I try to share as much as possible, but sometimes if I post a salad, on my stories, people see it and maybe don't take it into account because it's like, okay, this guy's, he's into fitness, so he's eating a salad. But then you post like an ice cream or pizza or sushi, and it's like, oh my God, how can you eat sushi or pizza and be in shape? And it's like, I mean, didn't you see the salad that I just posted like earlier? Because the thing is, nutrition is not about perfection, it's about context. Okay? Again, it's a matter of numbers. Like, you can eat realistically anything you want and still lose weight. Am I telling you to eat anything and, as long as you're in a calorie deficit? No, because of course, it's not just about calories in, calories out. We want to make sure that we're consuming the right amount of macronutrients and micronutrients because we want to be healthy and not just lose weight, but improve our body composition, right? So that said, you can absolutely have balance as long as you are approaching things correctly. So, if you are, again, tracking your stuff, you're checking your boxes when it comes to macros, micros, and at least I like to use the 80-20 rule. So, if you want 80% of your food coming from high nutritious whole foods, and 20%, from anything else you want. If you're doing that, I think you're right on track.
Perfect. Then we could go into the would you mark that down to the thing of constructing a nutrition program? If someone wants to go into let's say they want to start because like let's say they have a good training program. That's all set. Maybe they have good sets, they have their intensity is looking better, but now they want to focus on the nutrition. Would you say, because I've seen coaches and other people when they do a nutrition program, they specifically give out certain foods to eat. They go, all right, let's eat, I don't know, 3 eggs this morning with one coffee and 1 cup of coffee. Then like the next meal would be chicken with rice, I guess, or whatever, certain portions of that. Or do you give them more of a, this is your calorie intake. I want you to eat around this much protein, this much carbs, but you kind of give them the freedom to eat what they can, uh, obviously with having the macronutrients like proteins, fats, and carbs, and with consideration.
Yeah. So being honest with you, Juan, I personally think that doing that to a client, it's almost a disservice. Because the thing is, I really, when it comes to the people that I work with, at least the majority of the people that I work with are people who are just getting started into fitness. So these are not people who are aware of nutrition or have any habits whatsoever when it comes to, good nutrition, training, any of that stuff. So going from that to telling someone, hey, just don't ask me, or I'm not going to put words into anyone, but here's your meal plan, just follow it, and that's it. Like, okay, let's say for instance that someone puts you in a really low calorie diet, in a really low calorie, let's say, meal plan, and you lose some weight. Great, you lost 20 pounds, you look amazing, awesome. Have you learned anything? I don't think so. What do you think is going to happen once you stop once you finish working with that coach? You're just going to regain everything because you have not built any habits, you have not gained any skill sets, and therefore you're not going to be able to sustain it, right? So that's my view when it comes to providing meal plans, fixed meal plans to people. Instead, what I like to do is I first give my clients the knowledge. Okay, so I really help my clients to understand basics of nutrition. Okay, so like, okay, what are macronutrients? What are calories? How do we track them, right? And then what I give them is a list of foods that fit pretty much each macronutrient. And I pretty much tell them, hey, during the first 2 weeks, these are your macros. The goal is to reach protein and calories. If you go slightly higher on carbs, slightly higher on fats, doesn't really matter as long as you are within your calorie ranges and protein. And then, once my recommendation is like, once we find foods that you enjoy, like, okay, you really love your foods on Monday and you really liked like what you ate for breakfast, lunch, dinner, stick with that, right? Like, why change what's not broken, right? So, and more so for people who are really busy. It's like, I have people who work pretty much have the same schedule from Monday to Friday. So it's like, if you enjoy your food, just be consistent with it, right? So that pretty much do have both of the benefits of tracking, tracking in one hand that you can pick anything you want and fit in your macros, and meal plans that you don't have to think so much about prepping. You're just eating the same stuff every day. But still, my clients always have the option to swap their food choices. That's just a recommendation. Like if they enjoyed what they ate on one day, just stay consistent. That makes everything much easier.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important, because if they feel sometimes I feel like when you throw something very strict out of nowhere to a certain person, they or just to people in general, if you try to make them immediately follow something strict, they're probably not going to last very long doing it. Sometimes I like to tell people, if they start training, they think that they have to do everything all at once. Like, okay, training, nutrition plan all at once. I was like, well, sometimes it works if you just keep eating what you're eating. You just start getting consistent with training, and then once we have that going, then we could start going more into nutrition. Because sometimes when you throw a lot of things at once to some people, I'm not saying this goes for everybody, but when you throw a lot of things at once, they feel bombarded, and then they just don't end up doing anything. And I think it just comes down to either reading the client or just them being able to read themselves on how they react to certain things and how they feel is best to go at certain, I guess, goals and what they think is the best for being consistent. I did like how you mentioned the hands, because that reminded me. There's certain sometimes it's hard for people to track calories and even macros specifically. But there's a technique with the palm, right? I don't know if you heard about that, and I don't know if you ever recommended it. I've read it before. It's where they said they put like certain amounts of macronutrients in the palm, like let's say protein, 3 palms of protein, and then a handful of carbs. Have you ever tried that before? Have you ever tried it yourself? And if that worked, do you think that's a good way of, or do you think it's good enough Do you start seeing results from just starting with that?
I have not tried that, to be honest with you, and I don't think that I have ever recommended that to a client. Because the thing is, I really like to be accurate with at least the things that I'm consuming. If we're talking about someone who's just getting started, maybe that's something that I would implement, you know, at the beginning. But funny enough, and now it's funny that you're saying it, it's yes, it's hard. Like tracking macros, it's hard. Don't get it wrong. But just like anything else, it's a skill, and the more you do it, the easier it gets, right? So that's pretty much what I try to communicate with the people that I work with is like you have to be aware that the first 3 weeks it might be a little bit of a challenge. The more we do it, the better we get. And also even for people, there's a lot of clients that come to me and they like one of their main goals is, you know, I want to get into this point in my life in which I don't have to really worry about food. I want to be able to intuitive eat and be in shape. And I'm like, you know, we can absolutely do that, but I don't think that intuitive eating is what you want. What you want is informed eating. So once people get, really used to tracking, and I think that maybe you relate to this one. Like there's a point when you're really good at tracking that even if you didn't weigh the food, you see it and you, okay, this is around 600 calories, 40 grams of protein, 10 grams of fat, and around 40 grams of carbs. So you already have some idea because you have so much practice with tracking. So that's pretty much what I do with people that want to not stress about food, actually understanding what food does to you and how to do this more in a more intuitive, more informed way in the long term, right? So yeah, that's how I approach it. I can hear you. I can hear you for some reason.
Good.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important. I think it's a really good way to go at it, especially with nutrition being one of the most, I think it's the hardest thing um, that I see people struggle with because they're they're consistent. They like going to the gym, but once they get home or once they go on the weekends, they think first of all they think weekends don't count. It's like they act like, oh, I ate good Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday. I'm just going to go a little offbeat, and then they end up going way off the scale, and they end up taking in a lot of like pretty much all the food that they pretty much cut off for the weekends or for the weekdays sometimes. And that's something that I also want to bring up. It's like people who like to go out or go out a lot in the weekends, and they like drinking or they kind of just go to restaurants. Do you think there's a way to kind of counter for that? I don't know, like I guess a simple would be like maybe make them do more cardio, or do you tell them to kind of cut down on the orderings or on the drinking? Do you think there's a way for them to be able to limit themselves a little bit while still being able to have fun and go out and do all the things? So the point of being good looking for summer is to do all those things as well. It's not just oh like you look super lean but then you have like a strict certain structure that you can't do certain things because you don't want to lose that. You don't want to look that you don't want to lose that physique.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that it all comes down, and this is the way in which I like to phrase it, is if you want to get in shape and you want to lose X amount of pounds, okay? I like to think about it and you still want to go out on the weekends, right? Okay, so I usually ask this question, like if you wanted to save money because you want to buy a house or you want to go for a trip, but let's say that you're doing really well during the weekend, but then during the weekends you kind of go crazy and you say, I deserve this, and you go on a buying spree. Do you think it's gonna be likely for you to save money for that big goal that you have? Very, very unlikely, right? Same thing applies to nutrition. It's a matter of numbers. So if you still want to go out and have, fun, which is, by all means, we can all do that. Um, you might have to take some action steps to counter the, let's say the, or not, or take the best decisions under those circumstances. So if I have someone that I know that is gonna go crazy on the weekends, what I usually do is, okay, plan ahead of time. So where are you going? Okay, so I'm going actually on Saturday. I'm gonna have a dinner with my wife or with my friends, or I'm going out. Okay, then we plan ahead of time what we are going to do in that circumstance. So it's like, if you know that you're going to eat a little bit more than usual, let's try to cut a little bit of calories the day before and the day after. And then during that day, let's try to make sure that we're prioritizing protein throughout the day. So you have a good calorie budget to spend at that time. So it's like, if you're going to a restaurant, try to be wise with what you pick, right? So more, load up on veggies. Of course, enjoy yourself if you want to, but make sure that you're loading on veggies so that you're consuming less calories overall, and drink a lot of water. I think that that's the biggest thing when it comes to food. If we're talking about someone who's going to a restaurant, I don't like to go crazy with cardio. Be honest with you, I don't even give my clients like a set cardio to do, because I think that most people, when they start to do cardio, it's like specific cardio in the gym, they tend to move less throughout the day, which is really counterproductive when it comes to fat loss. So more so a step goal. So I try not to do that when it comes to, like, let's kill you with cardio as a punishment for enjoying yourself in the weekend. That's not something I do. Um, if anything, I just tell my clients, it's like, just go out for an extra walk if you want to de-stress as well. Um, if we're talking about drinking, I try to really recommend to completely avoid, um, let's say, cocktails. More so things like vodka, and just try to be wise when it comes to alcohol, because as you know, alcohol, it's really bad. In excess can be really bad for muscle building and fat loss overall. So really bad for body composition. But of course, as anything, in moderation is it's fine. So yeah, I mean, to summarize, prep ahead of time, prioritize protein if you know that you're gonna eat a little more than usual on a given day, and just get a little more movement before and after, like the days before and the days after. That's pretty much how I handle it.
Yeah, so with alcohol, I know something funny. I've heard stories of bodybuilders. Sometimes they would actually drink vodka because it apparently dehydrates them. I don't know if you heard that rumor um around. So because what people do now, and I've had friends who do this sometimes, they're like, oh, before we go to the beach, I just drink a little bit of vodka or like a little shot because it dehydrates you and it makes you look, I guess, less with less water retention. Um, I don't. I've I've heard that. I've never seen it. I don't know if you have
Yes.
a. I don't know if you heard that rumor with bodybuilders around.
Yeah, I've heard it. Actually, I thought that did you say like it hydrates you or dehydrates you?
It dehydrates you, which is the
Dehydrates.
reason
Okay, makes
why.
sense. Yeah, makes sense. I was like, okay, maybe I didn't hear right. Perfect. So yeah, actually, when I the first time I competed, I remember right before stepping on stage, like all these like bodybuilders that were like they were taking like vodka shots before stepping on stage, and was like, what's going on here? It's like too early to celebrate, right? But it's not. It seems to be the case that it kind of helps you to get a little bit extra dehydrated. Um, but again, that's not improving your body composition whatsoever at all. It's just allowing you to drop a little bit of water. Like, if anything, like, I don't think that maybe drinking coffee does the same. I don't know, maybe. And coffee doesn't help you improve body composition. Um, so yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, because then I don't know if it's much of a notable difference. I think it's not. Maybe it's like a slight notable difference for a judge, or but also when like you're already in that level of you're already really low on fat, and there's like this a little bit more that can probably help. It would be like a little notable for a judge. Maybe that can come into play, but if it's like for the average person who's like just going out and they're like, oh, I'll just drink a shot of vodka or something like that, just to dehydrate myself a little bit. I don't think it's gonna make much of a difference. At least I don't know.
Exactly. I mean, it's like
I
you
haven't
have to
seen.
understand that bodybuilders, what you do in bodybuilding, it's to look at your very best in a matter of minutes in a stage. After that, it's over. It's like there's no sustaining that whatsoever. So if you're just starting your fitness journey and you think, hey, I'm gonna take a shot of vodka before going to the beach, that's not going to do anything at all. I promise you. So just double down on that nutrition, double down on that training. That's going to pay off way more.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we get into the Q&A, because I know we have a little bit of time left, tracking progress is something that I see a lot of people try to do, um, but they sometimes do so, I don't want to say incorrectly, but very messy without like much organization. They might take a picture and then they might take another picture like a couple months later. But and yeah, sure, that could count. I don't know if you want to get more specific on if there like a certain way of keeping the same on how like you should take a picture now with the same structure, with the same or like with the same pose or anything, and then do it later. If it matters if you do different poses, because I know people take sometimes a front pose and then like 3 months later they take a side pose and then they're like, oh, that's working, but sometimes it could just be the lighting. It's like different things to take into consideration with that. And lighting is a big thing because if you have really good
Yes.
lighting, you look really good. And if you don't have really good lighting, they sometimes say that like, oh well, then I don't look good anymore after 3 months. It was like, nah, you probably have made progress, but the lighting you have or the position you're in maybe not may not notice that, have people notice that as much as you think they would.
Yeah. So I think that when it comes to progress, it's a matter of making sure that we have more than one uh, way to measure. If we just rely on pictures, that can only tell us so much. If we only rely on body weight, that can only tell us so much, right? I'm really a huge advocate of just getting as much information, as much data as possible. So when it comes to fat loss, you said it yourself, it's really hard to measure progress when it comes to pictures. But I really ask my clients to, try to keep as much variables um, as consistent as possible. So, if you pick this side of your house to take your pictures, please try, if possible, try to stay in this place and with the same lighting and the same background or whatever, so we know for sure we can tell the difference over time. Because if you change places, lighting, angles as well might change, so it's really hard to measure there. But I think that that's when it comes to pictures. Just try to make sure to keep those variables as equal as possible. The next thing is body weight, and this is a huge one because a lot of people kind of freak out. Most of the people that I work with at the beginning, they kind of have these. There's this fear that most people have to the scale, and I really think, and at least in my experience, it comes down to understanding these numbers. It's crazy to me to hear that there are coaches that they tell their clients just weigh yourself once a week or once every 2 weeks. I'm like, what? Like, how do you even know? How do you assess progress that way, right? That's my question. Because we really want to make sure that when it comes to tracking progress, what I tell my clients is like, you have to be aware that body weight is going to fluctuate a lot, maybe even up to 5 pounds daily, even if you happen to track your macros perfectly for multiple reasons, like maybe you had a little more salt, maybe you were really stressed that day, and that's fine. We really just pay attention to that trend overall. So body weight, I really ask my clients to track it at least 5 days per week, consistently, fasted in the morning. At least, again, trying to keep variables as equal as possible. So making sure that it's if they go to the bathroom before that, try to do that more most days if possible. If not, just try to be consistent with how you track it. So it's pictures, body weight, and also measurements. So I also ask for, when it comes to fat loss, I ask for waist measurements, and that usually I ask for those every 2 weeks, not every week. Now, for muscle building, it's a little bit different. I still ask for progress pictures. I ask for body weight because again, we want to see that trend where it's going, so we can make adjustments. And I also really pay a little more attention into training. So if we see those numbers going up from mesocycle 1 to mesocycle 3, and we see that okay, the RAR RPE is staying pretty much the same, even though weights are going up. That's a good proxy that we are putting lean tissue. So that's the only difference that I that I find from fat loss to muscle building.
Right, and speaking of having more of a variety when checking progress, I remember I watched a video and I heard you say that something that I really like. One thing you do to keep track with your clients is that you have them record videos of their executions and their exercises, and you see if that's gotten better as well. Because progress isn't just about, seeing results on your physique, but it's also seeing results everywhere else, as you said, whether it's lifting more weight, progressive overloading, but also their their executions in the gym, how better they're getting at the certain exercises you have them do, or I guess the person does in general. Um, is that something that you think is also pretty important, and you'll kind of put it up there on the scale of tracking progress and part of all that?
Yeah, I think it's just equally important as um, even tracking performance, making sure that you're at least having some sort of video, at least from time to time, of your training. Because the thing is, even for advanced lifters, even I find myself sometimes I try to do as good technique as possible on mesocycle or on week one of a mesocycle, and then if I don't keep track of the way I execute the given movement, then by week five or even week six, if I get to that point, I might see a video. If I record from just week one, I don't record any again, and then I record week six. Even for myself, I might like my cadence per like my velocity on the eccentric might be a little faster. Maybe my movements are not as sharp, and therefore I'm not engaging the muscle that I'm trying to engage as much as possible. So did I really overload? I'm not sure, because I'm not keeping the movement consistent. So that's a huge thing that I also apply to my clients. Like, even if you're doing the same weight, or even if we have to reduce the weight, but we improve that technique from where we started, that's progress still. So that's why I asked for that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's also pretty cool because even if you never recorded yourself before, if you try, you'll be surprised on what you can find. Um, I record myself sometimes. It's like you think you have good technique, but then you look at it like, well, there's a lot of things I could actually fix on watching this. Um, so I think it's cool, and I think it's pretty important if people try to record themselves here and there. I'm not saying to do it every single exercise, but maybe choose an exercise and say, hey, I feel like I'm doing this okay. I feel my muscle all right, but maybe if I record myself and I can see how I'm performing it, there's some things you'd be surprised on how you could correct yourself in doing it. Um, that being said, uh, I do want to get to the Q&A. There's a couple questions, real quick, which I do want to talk about the range of motion stuff, because one of them goes, why why do you always do full ROM on everything? I don't know. That was a question. I'm not sure. You do it on everything, but maybe just what they see you post. Is there a reason why you love full range of motion? Do you think it applies to everybody, or do you think there's like a nuance there?
Yeah, so I think that full range of motion, and the thing with me is I'm not married to any like take. The thing with full range of motion is that as soon as I started implementing it, at least in most lifts, I get the best SFR. For those of you who are not aware of what SFR stands for, is stimulus to fatigue ratio. So, if I do a set, for example, of squats, and I go halfway, compared to a set in which I do go all the way down, I get a full range of motion, a deep contraction, a deep stretch. Man, if I compare both, I'm gonna be messed up with the full range of motion one. And on the second one, I might be able to use more weight, but I might not be able to get the same stimulus, and maybe my knees even might hurt. Because I remember before I even started applying full range of motion, I had this mindset, just like most people, I have to lift as much weight as possible. And I got to a point in which I was squatting, I was just trying to load up my squats and my leg presses. And for the first time in my life, man, I was like 16 years old or 16 years old or something, and I started to feel pain in my knees. I was like, what's going on here? Like I'm too young for this, you know. I'm not even going that deep. And that was again because I was just loading up the machines without really focusing on execution whatsoever. So again, if you get a really good SFR without going full range of motion, you know, maybe you get, let's say for a lot of races, right? Right. Let's say that you feel much better going parallel instead of going, you know, super rump like sometimes I do. That's fine. Stay with that. But yeah, that's it. I just get the best stimulus with it.
I also agree with that. I honestly, ever since I started doing forearm, it's like I can use less weight. It just feels better. And this is coming from, us who are pretty young. You can only imagine as we get older, uh, all that weight is just going to feel heavier and heavier and just going to, feel a little tougher on the joints. Also, I like having the idea of flexibility. I don't know. You seem pretty flexible, especially doing like, I think you're doing incline curls on a flat bench. You get a regular person to do that, it might feel really uncomfortable for them at first. So it's cool. I think it's cool seeing you explore really big ranges of motion because in the long term, I could see that being pretty beneficial. Um, Second question actually leads me to why do you lock out? Are you aware of constant tension and do you think it's important?
I think that that's a mile topic, to be honest with you, because the thing is, locking out, yes, it might take a little bit of tension away from the muscle, but it also allows you to get more reps in a given set, which allows you to potentially get more hypertrophy in that given set. So is it bad? I don't think so. I think that it just allows me to get a little more, you know, rest in between um, in a given set, and therefore prolong a little more the amount of work that I can handle. Um, am I saying that it's better or worse? No, I'm just saying that in some instances I do it because, you know, example, if I'm doing a heavy set of leg presses, let's say that I'm doing the rep range is something like 7 to 10. I will lock out because it's heavyweight, and usually after at least the way in which I approach heavy work is I treat every rep as a single. So I want to perform the rep as optimally as possible and be prepared for the next one. So I go down, up, okay, feel good, down, up, repeat. Now if I'm doing something like a higher rep range like 15 to 20, I might not lock out because it's not that much weight, and I don't see any. Like I actually think that in that instance, not locking out and just getting the reps in, of course, making sure that the eccentric is on point, that I'm even doing a slight pause at the bottom. I think there's a lot of benefit there as well. But I don't see any extra benefit from locking out in that specific scenario, right? So it really depends. I don't think it's better or worse. It just depends on what you're doing.
Yeah, and I see a lot of people hate on logging out on the leg press or just mostly on the leg press. It's always your knees. It's never your elbows or anything like that. It's always like careful before you lock out your knees. And um, I don't know. Ever since I started locking out, it felt good. I feel stronger. I feel
I
like I'm
think it's
missing the.
it's just really funny because if
Sorry.
you like people, it's really funny because people will say, well, you shouldn't look out on leg press. I'm like, okay, so should you look out on a barbell squat? No. Should you look out on a bench press? No. Okay. I'd like to see how much you're lifting there. I'd like to see how much, uh, if you can handle actually decent weight through a full range of motion without locking out. I'd like to see that. Of course, if you are doing, very light work for higher reps, you might not need to lock out on a bench press, right? If you're doing presses, right, with the barbell, you might not need to lock out at the top. But if you're doing like, 315, are you not going to lock out? I don't know. I'd like to see that on video. So that's my take.
Probably unconsciously they might lock out just because it feels just naturally you feel strong in that position. Um, and that could go for I've heard people even on Instagram, they're like, oh, I never lock out on squats either. And I'm like, that's just ridiculous. Like, can you tell me why? Like, do you walk out when you walk? Like, do you always walk with like with your knee bent? It's just I don't know. I guess I get it's fear, but I mean
So
that's really just up
here's
to
here's my thought process. If you're using, and this is again, this is one of the reasons why I really like to do a full range of motion on pretty much most movements. The reason why is because I promise you that if you are using a weight that allows you to get a full range of motion for a decent amount of reps on any movement, it can be a leg press, it can be a hack squat for legs, it can be a press, anything. You are not going to, you're most likely, unless you're doing it on purpose, you're not going to get hurt by locking out because you can actually handle that weight. The problem comes when you are just, let's say, using a leg press and you're putting half a ton on that leg press, half repping it. And the thing is, the only videos that I've seen people getting hurt on the leg press is in this case. They put tons of weight on leg press, and then they kind of go like a quarter of. They get like maybe just a little distance. They don't even press, and they pretty much look out to save their lives because if the leg press goes slightly lower, it just will everything will drop on top of them. Of course, that will get you hurt, not because of the lockout, but because you're using really pretty much this weight that you can't handle and you're doing uncontrolled motions. So, if you're actually using weights that you can control and you're doing the movement correctly, you will not get hurt by locking out.
yeah, absolutely. That's true. All the videos, I've never seen anyone get hurt. I guess doing a really good rep. I don't know, 4 seconds or 4 seconds down, 3 second hold, and stuff like that. I've never seen anyone get hurt doing walking out, doing really good weight. Maybe if you have like those hyper laxative joints that I've seen some people have like really flexible elbows, like maybe if that feels uncomfortable, like I guess I could see an excuse for that or just a reason for that. But in general, for the average person, like I don't think it's dangerous. I think it's more beneficial. Two more questions. These are pretty short, and then we could end it there. This person asked, "Do you carb cycle for competition?"
So I think it's a matter of context. I do not, for the most part. I just even I keep uh, my nutrition pretty much the same for prep from beginning to end. The only thing that might change when it comes to like carb cycling or cutting carbs in for X amount of days, completely is when we're like let's say a week before when we start to get into peak week and that sort of thing since we want to kind of getting in our best shape for that moment in stage. So uh, that's a moment in which we kind of cut carbs from like, at least in my case, I cut carbs completely for like 3 4 days, and then right before stepping on stage we carb load because now we're really sensitive to carbs and we're going to be looking like super full for the stage. But aside from that, I don't see any extra benefit from doing that.
And I don't think you'd say it's necessary for like the average person who wants to look better. They need to carb load. Is that really just for competition purposes?
Yeah, honestly I don't see any extra benefit. If anything, if I think that there might be benefit if let's say someone, if you are prioritizing your legs and you really want to train your legs really hard and you have some days in which you just don't train at all, you know, just yeah, you can prioritize some extra carbs for those days and maybe eat a little less on the days that you don't train. But I don't know if that we can call that carb cycling. That's the only way in which I would approach it.
And the last question, kind of a double question. It's do you think people should train abs, and do you use any recovering modalities of saunas or cold plunges?
Okay. So I really think that for the first question, it really depends on the person. I think that most people don't need to train abs, being honest with you. As long as you're training, you're doing a decent amount of compound movements, uh, you are going to develop your abs as a consequence. And you're using your abs for pretty much every movement that you do, from walking to picking things off the floor, moving things around. You're using your abs for that. Those abs, for most people, are going to show up as when you are in a low body fat percentage. That's it. There are people who might need to work because, genetically, maybe you don't have those abs insertions, so therefore you might need to grow those muscles. And so, if anything, just start to actually train them as any other muscle group, so that they can grow. So get enough train volume, maybe train them 2 to 3 times per week, because abs tend to recover really fast. Um, but for the most part, I think that's more so a nutrition thing. And when it comes to the recovery, like how do you call it? Did you call them recovery um, tools, recovery tools,
Modalities,
modalities?
yeah,
I
recovery
think,
modalities.
yeah, I honestly don't do any of those. I really just focus on. I really think that most people just need to focus on nutrition, rest, and just sleep. Um, most people that I think most a lot of people that I see that are just doing a lot of cold plunge or sauna don't even get enough sleep. So honestly, I think that there's a hierarchy of priorities, and if you're not checking up that box of nutrition and sleep, those are the first things that you should look up to.
Yeah, those are definitely the big ones because some people I think they try to make up for that with cold plunges and saunas. I've seen people go, I don't really have too much good night's sleep. I sleep like 4 to 5 hours a night, but I use the cold plunge to recover my muscles faster, something like that. And I'm like, I don't think that it's not. Maybe you could see it. Maybe you could see some benefit. I don't know if it probably placebo. For a short amount of time, but if you notice that long term, it's going to start to fall down on you if you don't have good sleep. So that's something that happened to me. I wasn't sleeping good, and it was going good for a little bit, but then it eventually caught up. So uh, sleep is one of the most important things, um, and nutrition, of course. So all right, Jorge, thank you so much for your time. Uh, Sorry about some of the noises about the podcasting, but hopefully people would still able to get really good knowledge about this. I think this is really important for them to hear, especially with all this science going around and they don't know where to start. I think you explained things very well and hope you cleared up some uh, topics that they were asking on how they could get started, and for them to have the some hope to be able to get some results in before the summer.
Absolutely. Got to. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully it was of help.
All right. You have a great day. Thank you so much.
Take care, brother. Bye.